I'll come back next year and let you know. But on the 50 years, half century, let me go back to your point. You spoke about what you thought was the typographical error, why I picked 50 years after. Many of you would be familiar with Alexander Dumas' book, Three Musketeers. There's a sequel of that book called 20 Years After. And the short point of 20 years after was that the relationship between the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan was unpredictable 20 years later. So when I looked at 50 years after, I was wondering to myself, who would have imagined in 62 that we'd be today worrying about trade and worrying about intellectual distance and global issues and so on. I think there is a lot to be said for unpredictability of relationships between states, and perhaps that is something we need to think about. On the intellectual distance, if you live in China and you travel, which I do a lot, particularly to Chinese archaeological and historical sites, there's an amazing imprint of India in China. I've actually been to sites where in the middle of I'm not just talking the obvious Buddhism, and I've actually seen in grottos in China, in the middle of Buddhist carvings, someone has done murga, and this is in Yungang, in Datong, which probably goes back almost 1800 years. So I think what has happened is that because of partly the colonial period in India and the period of foreign presence in China, and then just when the relationship was sort of beginning to come together, we had the border dispute and then 62. We've actually forgotten a lot of our shared history of contacts. I mean, common sense would tell us you can't have two such big societies living next to each other and not having extensive contacts. But yet, if you ask most people, that is not the impression that people have. And if there is a single book I would recommend, because I just reread it recently, it is a book written in 1944 by Professor P.C. Bagchi, who spoke, I think, about 20 languages, including a lot of languages in China today, for which there are very few speakers left. We are actually, I refer to it in my talk, we are actually translating it and publishing it in China as part of a sort of 1962 gesture. But if you actually read that book, and the book actually his preface begins with the sentence that he's written it in 44. Now in 44, as someone reminded us, you actually had a Chinese force which was being trained in Bihar to be sent back into Yunnan. You had the Chongqing supply route which was going on. Chiang Kai-shek was actually pressing Churchill in international conferences saying independence for India is an important foreign policy objective of China. And actually he created a lot of bad blood between China and the UK because he took up India's cause. So you have a period in the 40s where India and China, P.C. Bagchi begins this way. He says, a war has actually brought us closer and made us remember a past that we've all forgotten. But unfortunately, another war came and closed it once more. So I think this sense of what our contacts were, sort of what is our shared history, because if you don't remember your past, you're not going to have any sense of working together in terms of common goals, because the sense of distance remains very strong. And when we push for Chinese language teaching, it isn't just the language. I mean, it's not a transactional utilitarian gesture. I mean, it is a sense of some understanding of China, which people in India actually very badly need. I had the good fortune of going to a university where Professor Muni taught, and a lot of us learnt about China at that time. But that's not really common in India. I mean, most people have a very, very limited sense of Chinese culture, Chinese history, Chinese politics. The career advice. I would say try to become like Elizabeth Taylor's second husband, which is do it well and make a difference. And I think that's Richard Burton, if I'm not mistaken. Was it second or third? Third, is it? Okay. But really, if frankly, if I were 25 today, I would be looking to embark on a business career in China. I mean, if I was sitting there, my model would not be here, my model would be there. Someone who can run 205 centers of IT education in India, I think in China, that I think makes a huge difference. And business today actually can play a bridging role. Again, I'm not overplaying it. I don't think they will solve all problems. I pointed out to you there are challenges in the business world. But I think if there is a difference to be made, it is actually perhaps to underplay the argumentation and boost the transactions. I think that would really make a big difference. And a bit about non-traditional issues. There are two fundamental commonalities between China and India. One is that they are still developing economies, and that gives you a whole set of interests as developing economies. So that's really what shapes your attitude towards climate change, what shapes your attitude towards trade. Secondly, they are still, to global decision making, still relative outliers. I mean, we are still looking at very much a Western-based global decision making model. And after all, that's the basis for BRICS, which is the states who have not been, in a sense, given their due place. And also, I think because of our history, we both have very strong sovereignty concerns. So I think that creates a lot of convergences on non-traditional security issues, and in a sense, perhaps offsets some of the natural competition which might happen in more traditional international politics.
Thank you. Now I've got 3 questions from the rear. So